Welcome to the Howl in the Wilderness podcast. I'm your host, Brian James. On this episode, I speak with Stephanie McKay, an educator and mentor in earth-based skills and ancestral ways located on Gabriola Island, British Columbia. Stephanie and I met when I attended one of her Mythology Club sessions and found that we shared a common passion for tending to old stories in a way that reveals their deeper layers of meaning. In the first part of our conversation, we talk about her transition from working as a video artist to becoming a wilderness educator and her 12-year participation in Martín Prechtel's school, Bolad's Kitchen. In the second half, we take a deep dive into the old Germanic folktale Iron Hans, also known as Iron John, the subject of Robert Bly's seminal 1990 book. Stephanie offers some unique insights into the historical layers of the story that are fascinating and surprising. Even though I've read Bly's book many times over the past 30 years and recently conducted an 8-week online group where we read and reflected on the story, Stephanie's insights open up a whole new area of inquiry for me. In the audio version of part 2, I've included an afterword where I share some of that research. If you're interested in taking an even deeper dive into the historical and sociological layers of this story, check out the full audio version of this episode where I share some of the information I found after researching the ideas Stephanie shares in our conversation. This special episode is available only to members of the Howl in the Wilderness Patreon. To gain access to this and other bonus content, become part of the pack at patreon.com/Howl in the Wilderness. Thanks for watching. Oh, before we get going, do you pronounce your last name McKay or McKay?
Let's go with McKay. I've pronounced it McKay my whole life, but I've been doing some research on my last name, and I'm looking at the possibility of going McKay, but my whole life it's been McKay, so we'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm here with Stephanie McKay and Suki. So if you're just listening, our little rescue dog Suki decided she wanted to be on my lap right now. So if you're watching the video, you'll see Suki, I think, for the first time on the podcast, which is kind of fun because we'll be talking about the wild and wild soul and wilderness and all those kind of things. So it's kind of fitting. Well, thanks for joining me, Stephanie. It's been something I've been looking forward to for sure.
Thank you. It's absolutely an honor to be here, and I'm excited and also have been looking forward to this. So thank you for having me.
Nice. So maybe we could start if you would just introduce yourself, where you live, and a little bit about your work, maybe.
For sure. So I am currently living on what we now call Gabriola Island. It's in the Stephanie territory. And I've been living here for a total of about 8 or 9 years. I grew up in, the Vancouver area and spent a number of years in Montreal and Alberta and found my way back here. And I came back to Gabriola. I've lived here a couple different times. I came back about 4 years ago, and at that point started a wilderness school called Fiona Wilderness School. And also at that point started a very humble gathering called Mythology Club, which has grown since then. And I run programs, nature-based programs for youth and adults, both here on Gabriola and also up in the Comox Valley. And the school was co-founded with Kester Reed, co-director also of the school. And we've been growing it ever since. And there's several different paths that the school takes. There's more, earth-based skills. There's more soul inquiry, and right alongside that there's the mythology track. So that's what we're weaving together in our little school.
And well, we met because I was speaking to Tad Hargrave on the podcast a while back, and the story of Iron John came up,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, "Oh, you should talk to Stephanie McKay. She had some interesting insights about that story." And so, very shortly after that, as these kind of synchronicities happen, you were doing a Mythology Club gathering
Mm-hmm.
up island from where I am, and yeah, so we met there, and then I'm really just intrigued. Well, many aspects of your work, actually, the whole wilderness education part of it, and how mythology and story work fits into that. And you're also, I think, the first person I've spoken to on the podcast who studied with Martín Prechtel.
Mm.
I've had Bill Plotkin on the show, who I think you've also studied at Animas Valley.
Yeah.
And I've had, Michael Mead on a few times, and I've had people speak about Robert Bly, some of the people that Martín came up with. But yeah, I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone who's studied with him. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about that, your time in his school.
Sure.
But so you just started the school 4 years ago. What were you doing before that? Did you have a kind of a more conventional career beforehand?
No, I was just scanning back in my brain of, have I ever had a conventional career? I was working at various different nature schools or wilderness-based organizations prior, the sort of 5 years prior to that. It's my second career. My first career, I was actually a video designer when I lived in Montreal, and I did that for about 13 years as a video artist, and then had a moment where it was clear that that was not the direction that I wanted to go in my life. And that's when I started looking into more of the earth-based skills. And that was also the point at which Martín's book, Secrets of the Talking Jaguar, came into my life. And I had read maybe about half of it. And at that point, I just knew that I had to study with this man, and it went from there.
Mm. Well, I don't know if you know this about me, but I spent about 12 years working as a graphic designer in Toronto.
Oh, no way.
And then when I was in my early mid 30s, I had a, big existential crisis like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, I've been following this path and climbing the corporate ladder only to realize the ladder was against the wrong wall the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I started kind of digging back into some of these teachers like James Hillman and Jung and Joseph Campbell, and trying to figure out like, God, how do I find my true path in this life?
Mm-hmm.
So
It sounds like a very similar experience.
all too common experience. Although I don't know,
Yeah.
some people don't hear the call when it comes, I guess.
No, they don't. That's okay.
Yeah, but I guess you've always been a kind of creative person then.
Well, I think I had a sort of a latent creativity that I really struggled to express sort of through my teens and through university. I went to university. I have a degree in literature, which actually is cycling back around into my life, which is wonderful. Very happy about that. But I felt a very strong urge to create and be creative, but had no outlet. And as much as the media arts path was not my long-term path, it was the first place that I really found an outlet for my creativity. And I was just blown away with what I could do on a computer. And it really opened up a huge world for me. And I managed to find myself walking amongst quite a community of incredible artists and around the world. And so I'm very grateful for it. And there was, then there was just this point where it was just clearly that's not, my creativity needs to go in a different direction. And so I think through story and through handwork and crafting and being on the land, that's really where the creative desire and my heart and my soul found a place together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's true for me too that like the career in graphic design was like kind of the best compromise I could find between my creative impulse and a more kind of conventional life where you're making enough money to live in the city and all of that. Yeah. But at a certain point, I just felt like it was doing something to my soul, working. Because as I went up the corporate ladder, the jobs got less and less kind of arts focused, community focused, and more corporate focused. And I found myself just being like an idea machine for big corporations, and that started to really wear me down.
For sure. Yeah. We had this brilliant idea when we were, young artists, that there was sort of a group of us in Montreal, and we had this brilliant idea that we were going to fund all of our personal artistic projects with our corporate work.
Yeah, the Robin Hood approach.
Exactly. And so, we started doing this more corporate video work, and it just sucked all of the life out of me. There was definitely some of the artists that I worked with that were still able to do both, but for sure I couldn't hold both. And so the corporate stuff just took over, and I found the more soul-based personal artistic expression just got trampled. So the two couldn't live together in my world.
And so I mean, Secrets of the Talking Jaguar is such a kind of great gateway book for Martin's work, right? Like so many people I talk to, that's the first one that kind of grabbed them. What was it? I mean, you're a person from Canada. Read this book about this guy's shamanic initiation in Guatemala, right?
Yeah.
What was it about that stirred your soul?
I can remember the passage that I read that was the moment where I knew that I had to study with him. And it was, I think it was really, it doesn't matter where the story was, where he was, or where his life was unfolding, or it was really the essence of what he was going through. And ultimately for me, it was the relationship with the natural world that was cultivated through his shamanic initiation. I never had visions of going down the shamanic path, which is not what Bolad's Kitchen is at all. Martin's School, Bolad's Kitchen, it's not about shamanic training or anything like that. But it was really, the deep attunement and awareness and connection with the natural world and with the other than human world and the spiritual world. And that's really what drew me in. Yeah.
And I mean, it's a big journey to go down to his school in New Mexico. And I think he requires a commitment from his students, right? So was that a difficult decision for you? Was it hard to make that happen?
At that time in my life, it was really easy. It became harder as the years went on. They do ask for a 4-year commitment when you first register. There are certainly people who don't stay for the 4 years, but that's their request and hope when people are coming in. So yeah, because I had that I call it the lightning bolt moment where I knew I was going down the wrong path, and was also at a point in my video career that that was about 8 years in to my video career. I had come to a place of financial security with that career, and also with security within the industry, so that I had, you know, enough of a name. I was connected with a company that had enough of a name that I didn't have to say yes to every contract or every project. And so I had the immense privilege of financial means and time in my life to take off and go down to New Mexico, where Martin's school is. So that everything sort of came together at that point in my life where it was easy. It was fairly easy for me to, it basically was a 2-week commitment twice a year, to go down. And I had the capacity at that point to do it. My life shifted over the course of the 12 years of my life that I was going down there, and it became much harder. Because it's a huge commitment financially and time-wise, and spiritually, it's a huge commitment. And I felt very dedicated to that commitment the whole time. And I'm no longer studying with him for a number of reasons, but it was never, you know, the decision of, oh, is it time for me to, you know, continue my journey without going down there? Was never a moving away from the teachings or from the path, but just moving away from going down there, the time and the financial commitment.
Mm-hmm. So when you got there the first time, was there any kind of shock? Like, you know, you probably formed an image of him in your eye and what it's going to be like to be with him. And was there a shock between the fantasy and the reality when they met?
No, there wasn't. I certainly, I would imagine that everybody goes through this with any teacher that they study with over a long period of time. There is, you know, fluctuations. There are moments when, at least when I questioned and, you know, wondered, is this really matching up with who I am and what my path is? But no, for the first long while, I mean, it's an amazing journey. And the, you know, when we go there, there's a giant adobe hall, and that we study in with him, and it's absolutely spectacular. And the whole hall is built with a deep spiritual understanding of each part and how it's laid out and arranged. And it's absolutely magnificent what Martín has built and has sustained and offers to all of his students. There was one time we were working with pottery, and we were firing our little clay pots that we had made, little in size, magnificent in their beauty. But we were firing them, and we were all standing around the fire with this big outdoor fire, and all our pots were inside the fire. And we were singing to the pots, and we were singing to them as they are being birthed into this world. And Martín rode up on his horse and did this whole basically dance around us with his horse while we were all singing. And you know, that just went straight to my heart. And the beauty of that moment really was just an example of the beauty that continued to grow and be revealed to me in my life there, and also my life here. So it took a while for me to come to the place of any kind of questioning or discord in my fantasy versus the reality.
I think it's rare these days to expect people to commit to something even as long as 4 years with one teacher. I mean, we're kind of like in the time of the spiritual smorgasbord, like take a little bit from here, a little bit from there. If it's not feeling right, move on. And I think the most rewarding relationships I've had with older teachers is the ones that maybe are the most difficult to sustain through the periods of doubt and disillusionment and questioning. I found if you stick with it, though, there's usually something in that is a teaching for me, even why I'm questioning what I've been projecting, who is the real person, what were my expectations of them.
Totally.
Yeah, so there's something to that. Hey, just the sticking with a teacher.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's actually one of the things that attracted me the most to Bolad's Kitchen was actually the commitment that they were asking for. And Martín was very clear, this is not a get spiritual quick path, that he fully believes and stands by his belief that you have to go the route. There's no quick way. And in a world where everybody's offering quick results, he's one of the few that very openly says this is not quick. And I respect that and was really attracted to that. And it's hard. It's very, very hard. There's we were speaking about the financial and the time commitment, but the spiritual journey of those teachings is huge, and there's a lot of resistance that we have from our conditioning, that will bring up all kinds of reasons why we should stop going. And so I absolutely think it's important to, when we come to those moments of question or projection or frustration or anything, to do deep inquiry and really see where that's coming from. And if you can stick with a path and really go the route, then there are deep rewards and deep beauty within that. So I agree.
Now, it sounds like a big part of his school is learning handcraft of all different kinds. Like, it sounds like I'm kind of amazed when I hear reports from people who have gone, like the variety and diversity of handicrafts and arts and crafts, like the singing and all of that. I mean, does he teach all of this personally, or does he have guest people come in, like specialists in, I don't know, leather work or something?
He does a lot of the teaching, and he also has guest, teachers and guest specialists, we could say, come in. So there was one year that we did felting, and we made felt carpets. And he had, I think it was 3 women from Kyrgyzstan come, and all of them came from family lineages of felt making. And they came and guided us through the whole process. We did the traditional, Kyrgyz process of making felt carpets, which is phenomenal. And we produced, we each did our own small little felt carpet, and then we produced, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 large size carpets that then ended up going on the floor of the hall that we study in. And sometimes he would invite students from other classes. So he has multiple classes. When we were smelting copper once, and some of his students from his longest running class came, and they taught us how to use the bellows and make the forms. And so it's a combination. And he also does, of course, a lot of the teaching. And I think, you know, he has a knowing of how to do all of the things that, you know, he brings people in to do. Um, his work with his hands is amazing, and he's certainly done a lot himself.
It feels kind of overwhelming to me when I see someone like him, who's built this life that is so outside the kind of cultural, societal norms of North America. Like, is this what it takes? Is this what a soulful life looks like? And I mean, of course, now these days, it's hard to kind of get started on that kind of alternative lifestyle because of land costs and everything else. Is one of the ideas from that the exposure to all those different arts and crafts, maybe not that you're going to live a off-grid lifestyle, but maybe you find one or two things that really connect with you and that you stick with? Or like it doesn't seem so much about like giving you skills to live an off-grid lifestyle or something, but it's about finding something in art or craft that resonates with your soul that you will then continue to do. Am I getting the right sense of that?
Yeah, I think Martin's very clear that you're not getting a certificate at the end of this. This is not about you getting a job, you know, none of that. And I also think that I mean, I don't want to speak for him, obviously, but my understanding of why he's bringing in the crafts in addition to, or the handwork, in addition to the teachings, is because when we step into that, when we have the capacity to create beauty, we then have the capacity to feed the holy. And so there's a part of us that, you know, within our deep time DNA knows how to do all of these crafts, knows actually how to rehydrate a culture that has been oppressed or suppressed or lost over thousands of years. That memory is still in there, and it's that memory that gives us the capacity to feed something beyond our own life. And that's what my experience that's what Bolad's Kitchen is about. It's not about satisfying my soul. It's not about, you know, well, I need something to feel okay in my life. Not about that at all. And yeah, he's very clear. This is not about you being okay. This is about feeding something beyond yourself. This is feeding life beyond your own to address the current but and forever debt that we have to the holy, to somehow address or participate in the spiritual ecology. So it goes far beyond our own individual path, and yet that's, you know, finding some soul connection, finding some spiritual nourishment for ourselves. It happens. But to me, it's like that's a byproduct of what the actual intention is. So we go there and we gather to feed the holy. That's what we're there for.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's something about that is kind of getting to the root cause of maybe our individual ailment, is that we lack that capacity to feed the holy. And if we don't respect that obligation in a way, that's like at the root of our own individual soul sickness. So it's a kind of a therapeutic approach that's not centered on the individual and someone's own self-improvement or anything like that. But it does, yeah, have that effect
Mm-hmm.
but it's directed toward like feeding the soul of the world or the holy. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's
Mm-hmm.
very, I mean, not very common in this day and age to make
No.
that the focus.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this ties into a lot of um, the story work um, that I'm involved in, where a lot of the stories are about initiation, or or yeah, embody initiation. And we, over time, because we have lost initiation in the dominant culture currently, there's this, and there's, you know, these trends to grapple back towards it. But what's happening is that we're grappling back towards it from the lens of having lost it, which means that we're trying to get something for ourselves. That is, like, initiation is very commonly misunderstood as it's about the individual. It's not about the individual at all. What happens to the individual is a byproduct of initiation. Initiation is about the seasonal feeding of the holy, where the whole thing is that the initiate goes in. There's a lot that happens obviously during initiation, but it is about remembering and feeding the holy.
Right. Yeah, like the initiation is an initiation into your responsibility. Like now that you're an adult, here's your job. And it's not about you.
Yeah, I would say it's a marriage.
Hmm.
That it's actually, it's a marriage to
Hmm.
the holy. That's actually your first marriage. And then only once you've stepped into that marriage and then returned to your home, your village, that at that point you can step into a human marriage if you choose, um, without the hunger for that holy marriage.
Right. And all the complications that can happen in a human marriage when that initiation into the spiritual marriage hasn't happened. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because in the absence of it, there's then this, like, hunger and searching for that holy being in another.
Yeah.
And so that leads to
All kinds of
all
problems.
kinds of problems. Yeah.
Disappointments, resentments, because
Yes,
your partner isn't the divine masculine or feminine. They're just a human.
exactly. They're just a human. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, that the initiation is a marriage between the individual and the holy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard it put that way, but it's evoking something. So speaking about stories,
Mm-hmm.
um, obviously you were kind of involved in storytelling as a video maker
Mm.
to some degree, right? Uh, did you have, I mean, being in Martin's school in Bolad's kitchen, was that your initiation into working with stories on a say a deeper level or a more spiritual level?
Yeah. There's I also studied with within the lineage of John Young, in the Wilderness Awareness School, and um, that's where sort of storytelling was really brought to me. Um, and but then alongside that, I was also studying at Bolad's Kitchen, where there's not so much about storytelling. Martin certainly tells stories, um, and there's an understanding that's passed on around storytelling. But within Bolad's Kitchen, that's definitely where I first had um, the opportunity to step into a story and really understand that there are multiple layers to that story, and that the stories carry vestiges of an intact culture, of a deep spiritual origins. And that blew my mind, because I had studied literature in university and I had never even had a hint that there was something more there in the way that it was presented at university. I think that there was an intuition on my part somehow that led me to Bolad's Kitchen. But it really blew me away when I could read a story, excuse me, and I don't, to me, it's kind of a boring old story. And then I would go to Bolad's Kitchen and go through it with Martín, and Martín would really open up and move the story within us. And yeah, it was life-changing for me, for sure.
Yeah, it's something I've been looking at these days, like the way that we learn to interpret and analyze stories in our education system from this, like from a very particular perspective. It's like the story is there to be analyzed and picked apart and interpreted in order to make meaning of the story, relative to our consciousness. And what were some of the ways that Martín worked with stories that were a revelation to you or were different from what you learned in school?
Well, I think to get a really good sense of it, one, you could come to Mythology Club, and I just have a humble little hint of what Martín offers, but I learned a lot from him, and so I step into it as best I can. But if you read his book, The Disobedience of the Daughter of the Sun, he tells a story, and then he goes through the 5 different layers of the story. And so that's it right there, really. And he would give us a story to read before our session. And let's just say it's Parsifal. And we're expected to read the story beforehand. And so I would read the story, and as I said, I wouldn't really see much in it. And then Martín would read. He would go through the whole story. We would read the whole thing. He would read it, and then he'd stop at certain points and then basically turn it over to us and say, so what's going on here? And we would do our best to bring something up, and then he'd go through it. And really, I think he introduced stories as riddles to me, and the understanding that they're all riddles. And so they've got this expansion to them, that if we go through and we look at the individual words, we look at why something was said in a particular way, we do the research around if there's a particular stone that's mentioned, or a particular mineral, or a particular plant, do the research of that plant or that stone or whatever is being talked about. And then the story just starts to open up and blossom, and it's phenomenal what happens.
Yeah. I recently did what I called a slow read or a slow walk through Iron John. And I took 8 weeks with a group of men. And it was kind of an experiment for me, because I've never worked with a story over that length of time before. And I didn't quite know what to expect. I'd read Robert Bly's book on Iron John many times since I was, 19 years old. And I thought, I at least understood his interpretation of the story and how he kind of unpacked that riddle. But there was new and surprising things that came to me over this 8 weeks that I very unexpected and very disruptive, actually, in terms of my understanding of that story. And it was very mysterious the way that story expanded when I gave it time, and I really stayed with it. And like you said, did the research. Like when something would come up that I was like, why this? Like, why is Iron John iron? in the story? That was a big question that came up to me, and I
Mm-hmm.
just started doing research and following my intuition, and had an experience of Iron John coming to me in a dream and posing
Wow.
some questions to me that led me down areas of inquiry that I wouldn't otherwise have gone into.
Mm.
And that revealed something. And it was, it was such a kind of a wild experience. And it gave me a whole new respect for taking time with a story,
Mm-hmm.
not just, going to some workshop where they're going to talk about Parsifal and they're going to
Mm-hmm.
talk about how Marie-Louise von Franz interpreted it and
Mm-hmm.
nailed every symbol down. This is what it is. This is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But to give it time, let the story reveal itself to you. It like reveal its hidden meaning to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that's quite curious to me because, one thing that Martín says is that as soon as a story is written down, it's dead. So when that shift from oral culture to written culture, that's basically the death of these stories. And at the same time, there is still a living of the story that happens. And then when we engage with the story, it becomes a relationship. And there's ways in which the story starts to find its way into our lives. Our life starts to mirror back certain parts of the stories or give us guidance. There's some way in which the story is nourished by our tending to the story. And it's a reciprocal relationship when we really spend some time
Hmm.
to engage.
Mm-hmm. Again, it comes back to that the value of commitment
Mm-hmm.
and sticking with something.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like with a story when you think you've got it and you're
Mm-hmm.
kind of done with it, like, oh yeah, I know that one, on to the next one for me to master, and I can put it
Mm-hmm.
in my my medicine bag of stories, and
Mm-hmm.
but to really stick with it, yeah, you might be surprised what the story has to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a sense of, like you said, like a revivifying of something that's been kind of preserved in amber. Once the
Mm-hmm.
Grimm brothers wrote it down, that's the story.
Mm-hmm.
I think those characters are still living in the imaginal, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe still have new things to say.
Mm-hmm.
And they might even correct the way that they were recorded,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like that's been an interesting thing. Like just because the Grimm brothers wrote it down a particular way, like they were collecting stories and kind of like codifying them in some instances. Um, but there might be some I don't know, some alternate dialogue that was lost, or there may have been a mistranslation or a misinterpretation along the way.
For sure. I mean, one understanding that's been passed on to me is that all of these stories have done what they can in order to survive. So the stories have been shifted, distorted, changed over time in order to continue to survive, like underneath the hand of the imperial mind or of the current oppressor within a certain land. So with successive waves of oppression or colonization, the stories that are from that land, that are in that land, then have to sort of shapeshift a little bit in order to survive, in order to go sort of like under the radar of, what is not okay or what is okay. Or and I think that's why it's important to look at different different translations, different versions of a story, to really get a sense of, you know what's happening with this story, or what has happened with this story.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking particularly of the story of Parsifal and the Holy Grail,
Yeah.
and what Christianism uh, forced that story to do, like from that
Yeah.
perspective that this story will adapt in order to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may have to peel back some of those colonial layers
Mm-hmm.
of interpretation or obfuscation in order to get down to the kind of the pagan core of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I also think that those Christian layers, in the early days of Christianity and land-based traditions, there was a lot of, you know, sharing and overlap. And so more and more as I go, I'm learning to really see, okay, when this first happened, it was a very different time. There was different relationships. It's different than the way it is now. And I'm curious, how there was actually some mutual support at the time, which, there was also a lot of devastation that happened. And there's more to the story.
Mm-hmm.
There's, you know,
Yeah.
so
Christianity just didn't come in one fell swoop.
no, exactly. Yeah,
Yeah. And there was a lot of interesting adaptations that had to happen so that it would be accepted in pagan Europe, for instance.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Are you familiar with this old poem called Dream of the Rood?
No, I'm not.
This is one of the things that I'd never encountered until Iron John came along and said, "Hey, you might want to check this out."
Mm,
And it's one of the oldest known recorded English poems, and it's
mm,
one of those kind of like epic long form poems it's like a poetic story in a way, and it's
mm,
uh, told from the perspective of a tree that has been chopped down and made into the crucifix for
mm.
Christ. But
Wow.
it's told from the perspective of the tree, and the tree continues to speak even as it's made into the cross and undergoes the crucifixion along
Mm,
with Christ. And
wow.
it is one of those instances where the pagan and the Christian are in dialogue with each
Yeah.
other. And it's not clear whether the kind of if it's a purely pagan story that's trying to preserve something in the
Mm,
Christianization of the old world, or if it's a kind of a dialogue and syncretization of the pagan
mm-hmm,
and the Christian,
mm,
um, or if the Christian aspect of the story was put on it because the people who originally wrote down these stories were the literate monks.
mm-hmm.
And so they had their own agenda. And so it's not really clear, but it's one of those things where the story just, uh, well, it has its own story to tell.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating thing. I've never encountered anything quite so strange in
Hmm.
that clear mixing of the pagan and the Christian at that
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Um, well, can we talk about the story Iron John?
Yes, please.